You care about sugar control? So do we. That's why we start with lower sugar than other cereals and created our whole grain onyx sorghum to slow sugar absorption. This helps to manage diabetes and prediabetes. And we didn't forget about flavor. Our cereals are overflowing with it. From our cinnamon frosted shredded wheat to our honey nut toasted oats to our multi-bran flakes. Let's make this the healthiest year ever and finally say no to sugar. Buy a box of Grainberry cereal today.
Grainberry, Grainberry, healthy cereal for your family.
Are you ready?
Yeah.
Yes!
This is the Ross Kaminsky Show.
You're a great American.
Now, Ross Kaminsky.
Come on, man.
On Denver's talk station, 630 KHOW.
All right, before I bring my special guest onto the show, I want to tell you I think you won't hear this anywhere else, a hot mic recording that I got from a source of Andrea Mitchell from NBC News talking about my next guest.
He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
A very naughty boy. That is definitely what the left thinks about my next guest. A very naughty boy indeed, Senator Ron Johnson, a cheesehead from the great state of Wisconsin. Thanks for being here. You are such a naughty boy, Ron, that you have been banned from YouTube for a week.
Well, first of all, I'm proud to be a cheesehead, and I guess, quite honestly, it's a red badge of courage to be loathed and hated by the left and the likes of Andrea Mitchell.
Don't you wish that was really Andrea Mitchell? But anyway,
that wasn't.
He's a very naughty boy. So why did you get banned from YouTube again?
For just speaking the truth. It amazed me that they did. This was an interview I gave to the Milwaukee Press Club. And, one of the points I've been consistently making for over a year now is the fact that we should have robustly explored and researched early treatment using cheap generic drugs that could be repurposed to treating COVID in its early stages. I held the hearings on early treatment. After the first one, the New York Times labeled myself an eminently qualified doctor. They had the courage and compassion to treat COVID patients as snake oil salesmen of the Senate. But it's baffled me that we haven't pursued that course, because I always thought back in April of 2020, over a year ago, that if we had treatment for COVID, we could bust this pandemic before it really even got out of the blocks. And by the way, if you really take a look at, as more and more information is coming in terms of what the infection fatality rate of is COVID. Now, again, I'm not downplaying it. If you're elderly, if you have certain comorbidities, it's a nasty disease. I lost a dear friend 14 days after he was vaccinated, quite honestly. Wow. So again, I've lost loved ones that have died of COVID. So I'm not downplaying this disease, but I'm also not ignoring the enormous human toll of the economic devastation of these shutdowns that I would argue by and large didn't work. Certainly destroyed people's lives, increased rates of suicide, overdoses, those types of things, for a disease that if you are young, if you're very young, there's, I think, plenty of information out there that says that the flu is probably worse than COVID. And again, if you're basically young and healthy, you'll have pretty much an experience like I had. I had COVID. I was completely asymptomatic. 40 to 50% of people that get COVID are asymptomatic, and the public health officials really haven't explained what's happening there. They haven't talked about things like T-cell immunity, which is one of the marvels of the human body that does recognize pathogens, viruses, bacteria and stuff that are similar to other things you've been infected with that you've overcome. So we haven't, quite honestly, been honest with the public, certainly people, the health agencies. And so by conveying accurate information, talking about, for example, the VAERS system, where we now have over 4,500, I think it's over 4,500 deaths reported on the VAERS system, over 1,600 occurring within days 0, 1, or 2 of getting the vaccine. I was just on a Zoom call last night with a number of individuals who have experienced severe neurological adverse effects after being vaccinated. Literally within hours, it begins, and the symptoms just grow up to and including paralysis. And doctors are blowing them off. They're not taking it very seriously. Some, literally one child who's enrolled in the study, in the trial, they literally wanted to commit her to a mental ward. So no, this is serious stuff, and it's just being ignored. It's just tragic.
And I should note, folks, that since Senator Johnson was banned from YouTube for a week, and I find all this kind of censorship disgusting, we are streaming this interview right now live to YouTube. So if you want to drive YouTube crazy, just go to YouTube right now and type in Ross Kaminsky, and you'll find my conversation with Ron Johnson up there. I just want to clarify something, because Ron, whenever you say something, the many, many people who think that you are a very naughty boy will find a way to spin it to your maximum disadvantage, making you look as bad as possible and so on. Are you suggesting in any way that people shouldn't get vaccinated?
I was a huge supporter of Operation Warp Speed. I'm glad that tens of millions of Americans have been vaccinated safely, effectively, but I'm opposed to mass vaccination using a vaccine that is not fully approved. We're under emergency use authorization. I'm completely opposed to the FDA guidance that says ignore antibodies and evaluate whether or not somebody should be vaccinated. I had COVID. I have a large number of antibodies. I probably have T-cell immunity to COVID. It would be stupid, quite honestly, for me to get vaccinated, and yet it quite honestly creeps me out that our health agencies are pushing the vaccine on everybody, including children, young children, as I was just talking about. The science says that they really aren't going to benefit from a vaccine because they don't really have much of a risk from getting COVID. So why are we pushing a vaccine that we haven't gone through all the observational studies, where the VAERS reports are showing, from my standpoint, an alarming number of deaths within 30, 60 days of vaccination, an alarming amount within days 0, 1, and 2. The blood clotting, the neurological problems, the myocarditis. I mean, the anecdotal evidence is growing. And you also have to recognize that the VAERS system only captures a small percentage of the adverse effects. I mean, there's way over, I don't have the exact figure, but there's way over 10,000 hospitalizations related to the vaccine. And again, doctors and the medical profession is very reluctant to relate any adverse effect to the vaccine. So I truly believe it's grossly underreported. And so, Ross, speaking this openly and honestly and truthfully, nothing I said can be disputed. You'll probably be the next headline story in national news that this recording will be taken down from YouTube and censored because, for whatever reason, YouTube, the mainstream media, doesn't want the American public to have the truth. I'm the guy, the champion right to try. But a corollary of that is right to choose, informed choice. The Nuremberg Code basically says that nobody should be pressured, coerced, or fear reprisal for refusing any kind of medical treatment, and particularly one that is still in the experimental phase of approval.
All right, so let's just do maybe 2 more minutes on this, and then I want to get to some other things. I do want to point out that the VAERS system that has these adverse events, that anybody can submit anything to that, and those are not verified, so we don't know what percentage of those had necessarily had anything to do with the vaccine. Some might have, some might not have. We don't really know. And I'm I am less concerned about it than you are, which is not to say that I don't think that there's ever an adverse event, but I doubt there's very many significant adverse events. But we'll see it. Hopefully we'll get better data on that. I think the place where you and I are on exactly the same page, and I find it troubling, doesn't begin to describe it, the censorship and the determination by big tech, by social media companies to say, if Ron Johnson says anything that doesn't agree with the WHO, who's been wrong about everything, or the CDC, we're not even just going to put a little statement under it saying Ron might be wrong and he's a very naughty boy, but we're going to take it down. And that's outrageous.
But Ross, I thought in a pandemic, doctors would step up to the plate, and many did, by the way, and used their medical training, and they started practicing medicine again. Listen, I'm all for, practicing medical protocols. That makes an awful lot of sense. You really kind of, once you know something really works for the vast majority of people, doesn't work on everybody. Every human body is different, okay? Mm-hmm. But practicing protocols make sense. But in the midst of a pandemic, when there's so much unknown, when there's maybe different theories of the case. I mean, I had Pierre Corey on I had him testify in May of 2020. His group, the frontline COVID critical care specialists, world-renowned, that they were looking at ventilators. It's just not working. Mm-hmm. And it's also not the virus that's killing it. It's the body's immune response to it, the inflammation. So they started treating COVID with anti-inflammatory drugs, corticosteroids, and that became the standard of care. I've had doctors credit me with saving patients' lives because I put Dr. Corey up as a witness, and they heard about it and they started changing. So again, it's people like Dr. Corey, but the doctors that were posting videos, those were also taken down. If they use the wrong word, if they promoted using the wrong drug, like hydroxychloroquine or ivermectin, mm-hmm. Which again, more and more studies are showing that those things have some real effect, and a lot of doctors are absolutely convinced they work.
Right, and one last thing on that, and then I want to move on to infrastructure. You were one of the loudest voices early on about the potential, in particular for early treatment, using some of these protocols, using hydroxychloroquine or zinc and this sort of stuff. And it's not so much that you were saying, we know this does it. I think, I don't want to put words in your mouth, I don't think you were saying, we know for sure that this is a cure or even a treatment. But the idea was, and the idea that I buy into also is, it was an incredibly low-risk thing to try. Right, hydroxychloroquine has been around, and its predecessor, chloroquine, has been around for decades. I've taken it as an anti-malarial. It's well known as a very safe drug, and there was an argument, a scientific argument for why it could work, and it was a very, very low risk. It was not like we're going to give you a small dose of cyanide, and that would really bothered me. Had they just shut all that down when it was such a low risk thing to try.
No, exactly. I've been all for information. I'm not a doctor. I really can't tell you. I can't really look at the studies with real knowledge. All I'm saying is let the American people decide. Have a free flow of information. Don't censor it. Same way with the vaccines. I don't encourage or I don't discourage. Mm-hmm. Okay? I've got people in my family that have taken it, others that haven't taken it. I've let them make that decision based on information. But the government's role is to make sure that people have full access to all the information, not censor things, not to suppress it, but that's happening in government agencies, I believe. I think it's happening certainly in the media and the social media.
My special guest, Senator Ron Johnson, proud cheesehead from the state of Wisconsin, was banned for a week by YouTube. So this conversation is on YouTube. If you go to youtube.com and type in my name, you'll find it. Ron, I saw some not very detailed news about a group of centrist senators who are trying to put together an infrastructure bill that they say will not contain new taxes, and they say will repurpose a bunch of unspent, quote-unquote, COVID relief money. Do you think that bill has a chance? And more broadly, do you think there will be any infrastructure bill?
Well, I've been saying for quite some time the Republican conference position on infrastructure, we all agree we need to spend money on roads, bridges, dams, locks and dams, ports, that type of thing. But we do have $720 billion of the $1.9 trillion, air quote, COVID relief package that isn't even spent till 2022 through 2028. So I've always felt should be the Republican conference position that any new spending, including infrastructure, just repurposes that amount of money. So for infrastructure, that'd be $720 billion. That would be more than enough for the time being. And the fact that we've literally indebted our children to the tune of in excess of $6 trillion over the last 18 months, we just can't do more deficit spending. I just have to say, I hope they don't do a separate deal that creates more deficit spending, because if they do, all that's going to do is it's going to increase the amount of deficit spending the Democrats will be able to pass during reconciliation. Just more dependency, more social welfare programs. So if it's deficit spending, I'll be opposed to it. If it repurposes the $720 billion, I would actually support it, because I think everybody realizes we need to spend money on infrastructure.
If a bill came that was under $1 trillion and was 80% repurposed money and 20% deficit spending. Do you think you'd support it?
Yeah, I might, because if you're going to borrow money as a government, just like as a homeowner, you borrow money so you can actually utilize a house. It's not consumed in a year. So, in any capital good that you literally use for decades, you can finance that over decades. So, I'm not opposed to deficit spending for basic infrastructure. It would make sense. The only problem is this moment in time when we're already mortgaging our kids' future to just an unimaginable level right now. Yeah. At some point in time, somebody's got to, like William F. Buckley said, stand at thwart history and yell stop.
Right. Let's switch gears. I read a story about a bill that seems to be working its way through the back channels so far in Congress that is more or less an antitrust kind of bill, although at the moment it seems like it would only apply to 4 companies, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and Google, but looking maybe to break them up, but also to prevent, let's say, Amazon from selling its own products to compete with the third-party sellers who sell on their platform. A tenet of modern antitrust, at least, has been that you basically leave these companies alone unless what they're doing is harming consumers. You think, and a lot of people think, that might not be the proper standard anymore. Can you elaborate?
Well, again, I agree with you that I think was the problem in applying current antitrust law to potentially breaking up big tech. But antitrust law has been used in the past, I think, probably effectively to break up AT&T. So you end up flourishing of competition, telecommunication. I think probably the internet as well. Big oil. I think the issue with big tech isn't necessarily the consumer harm done by its monopolistic behavior, and it does behave as monopolies. They buy up all the competitors, very, very anti-competitive. It's very difficult for other people to establish a platform against Facebook or Google or whatever. I think the main issue here, the main problem for society, is the accumulation of power as it relates to the dissemination of information. For decades, we've had in place certain rules that make it either difficult or impossible for an individual, for example, to own a newspaper, a radio station, a TV station in a little town, because we don't want one individual to have that much power over information in one community. And yet we're literally having a couple individuals have such enormous power. And we witnessed it. I mean, they were behind Joe Biden. They got Joe Biden elected. But they suppressed information on Hunter Biden. I've seen polls that had Biden voters heard about that, Trump would still be president. So these tech giants have enormous and outsized power and influence over our politics and over the dissemination of information. I think that's a serious issue that we need to take a look at. I mean, we were just talking about YouTube censoring me.
Right. So I get it. And I do believe that they have liberal bias, and I do believe that they have an impact on our politics. But is that enough for a principled, free market conservative, and you certainly are that, to say this is a justification for government to meddle in the operations of private business, which is normally the kind of thing that would give you and me both hives?
Right. I personally think it probably would, but it would have to be done carefully, and I don't really credit Congress with the ability to do it carefully. Mm-hmm. I also think it's probably not going to happen. Democrats like the cancel culture. They like the censorship because it all favors them. Right. So I don't see Democrats joining with conservatives concerned about the growing power of the media. Now, there may be some sweet spot where they want to break them up because they just don't like successful companies. They don't like to see any company making money.
Yeah.
But again, I don't think they hate it that much that they literally would join in with Republicans to dramatically denigrate a huge advantage they have in the political realm, which is the fact that the media and the social media is part and parcel of the Democrat Party. Well, I don't believe that they would reduce their power base that much.
Yeah, I agree with you on that. It'll be interesting to see what comes of it, because there are people on the left and the right who for different reasons want to go after big tech. But the question is, can they put together a bill that actually appeals to both sides, and remains to be seen. All right, my last question for you. I'm going to ask you a different version of a question that a lot of people have asked you. A lot of people would like to know if you're going to run again, and you have consistently said you have not decided, and I believe you. So I want to ask you this. other than the question of, am I likely to win? What are the main factors for you as you think about whether to run again?
Oh, there's tons. I mean, if I were to run, would it make any difference? Listen, Washington, D.C. is so grossly frustrating. The fact that, for example, I held up the $250 billion deficit spending anti-China bill, supposedly, which I don't think will do anything to impact China whatsoever. It'll certainly give governments money to issue grants that corrupt, whether it's science or whatever. Government grants corrupt science, I believe. Okay. Some of them do, listen, you spend trillions of dollars, you do some good. So, I mean, that would be one factor. Does it really make any difference? But, what I can tell you is I think it's crucial the Democrats don't retain power. This nation is hanging by a thread right now. That thread is named Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. Pray for their good health. Pray that they honor their commitment to maintain the filibuster. That's an untenable situation. So we need to take back the House. We need to gain control of the Senate. And if I believe that I have the best chance to retain this seat in Republican hands, that will certainly be one of those factors I'll be weighing.
Right. So if you knew for a metaphysical certainty that your election, that the race that you would run would be the race that determined which party had the majority in the Senate, that would increase your likelihood of running.
Yeah, and I think it would increase my my family's support for me running as well. Yeah. They're patriots as well. They're concerned about the radical agenda of Joe Biden and his Democrat allies. I mean, let's face it, what we do know is Joe Biden is not a moderate. I mean, he is governing, and his administration is governing as radicals. And this is just jaw-dropping, I think, to most Americans.
I feel like I knew this was coming once he picked Kamala Harris as his running mate. Before that, I was going to say, all right, okay, he'll be a little less moderate than before. But once he picked Kamala Harris, I knew what we were in for, and I think you did too, since you know her better than I do. My special guest, banned on YouTube, but this video is on YouTube, at least until they take it down. Senator Ron Johnson, proud cheesehead from the great state of Wisconsin, and as so many liberals say about him,
He's not the Messiah. He's a very naughty boy.
Thanks for being here, Ron. Appreciate it.
Have a great day.
All right, we'll see you. He's a very naughty boy. We'll be right back.
This is Denver's Talk Station with Ross Kaminsky now. Michael Brown at 2, 6:30.